The morning sun painted the lake water gold as I cast my fishing line, breathing in the crisp, pine-scented air that had become my sanctuary after 30 years of corporate stress. I never imagined that within 6 months, I'd own every inch of shoreline this entitled HOA president was now screaming about, watching her face turn the same shade of red as the stop sign she'd illegally installed on public property. But I'm getting ahead of myself. 3 years ago, I bought my dream retirement home in Lakeside Meadows, a quiet community of 43 homes built around Crystal Lake, a pristine 20-acre body of water that had drawn me in the moment I saw the listing. The realtor assured me the lake access was part of the community amenities, clearly stated in the HOA covenants. Every homeowner had equal rights to fish, swim, and boat on these waters. For 2 blissful years, I spent my mornings on that shoreline. The gentle lapping of waves against the rocky bank, the call of loons echoing across the water, the satisfying plop of my lure hitting the perfect spot near the old oak that had been struck by lightning decades ago. It was everything I'd worked 30 years to earn. The lake wasn't just beautiful, it was productive. Bass, bluegill, and the occasional northern pike made their homes in its depths. I'd built a small dock extension with HOA approval. Nothing fancy, just enough to get my John boat in and out without scraping the aluminum hull on the rocks. My neighbor Bob, a retired teacher, would often join me for early morning fishing sessions, both of us content to sit in comfortable silence as the mist rose off the water. That peaceful routine shattered on a Tuesday morning in early June, when the smell of honeysuckle should have been my only concern. I was untangling a backlash in my fishing reel, muttering under my breath about cheap monofilament, when I heard the sharp crack of heels on the wooden walkway leading to the lake. The sound was aggressive, purposeful, not the casual shuffle of someone coming to enjoy the water. "Excuse me." The voice was clipped, nasal, with a particular tone that immediately put my shoulders on alert. "You need to move." I looked up to see a woman in her 50s, blonde hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her forehead, wearing what I can only describe as aggressive athleisure, the kind of workout clothes that had never seen actual exercise. Her hands were planted firmly on her hips, and her pale blue eyes scanned my setup with obvious disapproval. "I'm sorry, what?" I kept my voice level, but something in my gut told me this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. "I'm Margaret Hensley, HOA president," she announced, as if the title should make me salute. "This area is reserved for community events. You can't just set up here whenever you feel like it." I glanced around the empty shoreline, then back at her. "Community events? It's 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. What events?" "That's not the point." Her voice rose an octave. "The point is that you're monopolizing shared space. Other residents have complained." The lie was so obvious it was almost insulting. "Which residents?" "Bob's the only other person I've seen here in months." Margaret's jaw tightened. "That's confidential HOA business. But I'm giving you fair warning, this behavior needs to stop, or we'll have to take action." I stood up slowly, my knees protesting after sitting on the dock for an hour. At 6'2", I had a good 7 inches on Margaret, but she didn't back down an inch. If anything, she seemed to puff up like a threatened hen. "Mrs. Hensley, I've read the HOA covenants cover to cover. Every homeowner has equal lake access. I'm not breaking any rules." "Rules can be changed," she snapped. "And as president, I have the authority to ensure community resources are used fairly." "Fairly?" I repeated the word, like I was tasting something sour. "You mean like the way you've been using the community maintenance fund to landscape your own front yard?" The color drained from her face, then rushed back in an angry flush. "How dare you? Pink receipts are still scattered around your trash can from last Thursday. Wilson's Landscaping, charged to account 4,401. Same account number, that's on the HOA expense reports. I picked up my tackle box with deliberate calm. I may be retired, but I'm not blind. Margaret stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her heavy floral perfume mixed with coffee breath. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Enlighten me. Her smile was razor thin. Enjoy your fishing while you can. She turned and marched away, her heels clicking like a countdown timer on the wooden walkway. I watched her go, noting how she stopped at the community mailboxes to make a phone call, glancing back at me twice during the conversation. But what I didn't know was that Margaret had already scheduled an emergency HOA board meeting for that very evening. The next morning, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. Hand-delivered, according to the timestamp, at 6:47 a.m. The envelope was pristine white, with the HOA logo embossed in the corner, and my name typed in that aggressive, all-caps font that screamed official business. Inside was a single sheet of letterhead paper, NOTICOVENANTVIOLATION. Case 2023-41. Mr. Robert Chen is hereby notified of the following violation: S. Unauthorized extended occupancy of common area, lake access. Point 3. Installation of personal property on community dock without proper permits. Interference with community activities and events. Remedy required: immediate cessation of daily lake access. Personal property to be removed within 72 hours. Failure to comply will result in fines of $200 per day and potential legal action. Respectfully, Lakeside Meadows, HOA Board of Directors. I read it twice, then checked the signature line. 5 names I recognized, plus Margaret Hensley as president. The meeting had been held at 7 p.m. the previous evening, less than 12 hours after our confrontation. My phone rang before I could process the full absurdity of the situation. "Rob, it's Bob." My neighbor's voice was tight with concern. "Did you get one of those letters?" "Just read it." "Did you?" "Yeah, I got one too. Different case number, same bullshit." Bob had taught high school for 35 years. His profanity was reserved for special occasions. "She railroaded the whole board. Claimed you were aggressive and threatening during yesterday's encounter." "Aggressive?" I almost laughed. "She's the one who—" I know. Listen, Mrs. Patterson from Lot 17 was there. She called me this morning, said Margaret had photos." "Photos of what?" "Your dock extension, your tackle box, even your folding chair. Made it look like you'd built some kind of permanent fishing camp." Bob's voice dropped to a whisper. "Rob, she's been planning this. Had a whole presentation ready, like she'd been preparing for weeks." I sank into my kitchen chair, staring out at the lake through my window. The morning mist was lifting, revealing the perfect glass surface that I might no longer be allowed to enjoy. "There's something else," Bob continued. "She's calling a community meeting for Saturday. Emergency discussion of lake access policies. She wants to put it to a vote." "A vote for what?" "Restricted access hours. Assigned time slots. Maybe even a permit system." Bob sighed heavily. "She's going to try to get the whole community to side with her." I hung up and walked to my back deck, looking down at the lake that had been my peace, my retirement reward, my escape from decades of corporate politics. The morning sun was climbing higher, burning off the mist, and I could see the small dock extension that had apparently become such a threat to community harmony. Margaret wanted a war over a few square feet of shoreline and a $30 folding chair. What she didn't realize was that I'd spent 3 decades in corporate mergers and acquisitions, and I'd learned a few things about doing research. That afternoon, I drove to the county clerk's office in downtown Millers Falls, a 40-minute trip through winding back roads lined with maple trees just starting to show their autumn colors. The clerk's office was a brick building that smelled like old paper and municipal coffee, staffed by a gray-haired woman named Dolores, who looked like she'd been filing documents since the Roosevelt administration. "I need to research property records for Crystal Lake," I told her, sliding my driver's license across the counter. Dolores peered at me over her reading glasses. "The whole lake?" "The whole lake. Deed history, survey records, anything that shows ownership boundaries." "That's a big request. Honorable you looking to buy something?" "Maybe," I smiled. "Depends what I find." 4 hours later, I was sitting in my car in the clerk's office parking lot, staring at a stack of photocopied documents that had just changed everything. My hands were shaking not from nerves, but from the kind of excitement that comes with discovering a winning lottery ticket in your jacket pocket. Crystal Lake wasn't owned by the HOA. It wasn't even owned by the county. According to a deed from 1987, the entire lake and a 50-foot buffer zone around the shoreline belonged to something called Lakeside Development Corp., which had sold building rights to the original developer but retained ownership of the water and immediate surroundings. The HOA covenants I'd read so carefully only granted access rights, not ownership. But here's the kicker: Lakeside Development Corp. had been dissolved in 1994 due to unpaid taxes. The property had reverted to the state, then been put up for sale in 1995. No one had bought it. For 28 years, Crystal Lake had been sitting on the state's books as unclaimed property, available for purchase to anyone with enough cash and the patience to navigate bureaucratic paperwork. The current asking price, $47,000. I had $83,000 in my retirement cash account. I called the state land office from the parking lot. A bored-sounding clerk named Dennis walked me through the process. Clean title search, environmental assessment, 60-day waiting period for other bids, then closing. The whole process would take about 4 months. "Any complications I should know about?" I asked. "Nah, pretty straightforward. Though you might want to check with local authorities about any existing access agreements. Sometimes these lake properties have complications with neighboring communities." I thanked Dennis and hung up, then sat in my car for another 10 minutes, watching traffic crawl past the courthouse. Margaret's ultimatum had given me 72 hours to remove my personal property from the lake. In 4 months, I'd owned the lake. The irony was so perfect, it felt like fate. But first, I had to survive Saturday's community meeting, where Margaret was planning to turn my neighbors against me. Saturday arrived gray and humid, with the kind of oppressive heat that makes even the lake look uninviting. The community center was a converted garage attached to the HOA maintenance building with fluorescent lights that flickered and folding chairs arranged in neat rows, facing a card table that served as Margaret's podium. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a seat in the back, nodding to the neighbors I recognized. Bob gave me a supportive smile from across the room. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who'd apparently witnessed Margaret's board presentation, avoided eye contact entirely. Margaret swept in at exactly 2 p.m. wearing a navy blazer that looked like it belonged in a corporate boardroom, not a community center that smelled like lawnmower fuel and old tennis balls. She carried a leather portfolio and had the predatory confidence of someone who'd spent the week preparing for battle. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice carrying easily through the small room. "We're here to address a serious issue affecting our community's shared resources." I counted heads: 23 residents out of 43 households. Margaret had gotten a decent turnout, which meant she'd been working the phones. As many of you know, we've had problems with certain residents monopolizing our lake access. She didn't look at me, but everyone else did. Extended daily occupation of shoreline areas, unauthorized installation of personal equipment, and interference with community activities. What community activities? Bob's voice was steady but loud enough to carry. "I've lived here 4 years, and never seen a single lake event. Margaret's smile never wavered. That's exactly the problem, Bob. Individual monopolization has prevented the HOA from organizing family-friendly community events. Swimming lessons, fishing tournaments, summer picnics, all the activities that make a community special. It was masterfully done. She turned my morning fishing routine into an obstacle to neighborhood children learning to swim. I have some photographs that illustrate the scope of the problem. Margaret opened her portfolio and began passing around printouts. As you can see, this is more than casual recreation. The photos made my simple setup look like a commercial fishing operation. My tackle box appeared enormous from the angle she'd chosen. My folding chair looked permanent. Even my small dock extension seemed to loom over the community dock like some kind of hostile takeover. "This is ridiculous," I said, standing up. "Those pictures are completely—" "Mr. Chen," Margaret's voice cut across mine like a blade. "You'll have an opportunity to speak during the comment period." "When's the comment period?" "After the vote." The room fell silent. Even Mrs. Patterson looked uncomfortable with that particular piece of procedural manipulation. "Furthermore," Margaret continued, "our legal research has shown that the HOA has the right to implement access restrictions for the protection and enjoyment of all residents. I'm proposing a system of scheduled access times, equipment permits, and behavioral guidelines that will ensure fair use of our shared lake." She pulled out another set of papers. "I have draft rules here for your consideration. Lake access would be limited to daylight hours, with advance reservation required for fishing or boating. All equipment must be removed daily. No modifications to community docks or shoreline areas without board approval and a $50 permit fee." $50? Bob stood up. "To use a folding chair?" "To ensure that community resources aren't abused," Margaret shot back. "We're not running a private fishing club here." The room erupted in murmurs. I caught fragments of conversation, some supportive of Margaret's position, others questioning the sudden rule changes. But the crowd was leaning her way. She'd done her homework, framing the issue as community rights versus individual selfishness. "I call for a vote," Margaret announced. "All in favor of implementing the proposed lake access restrictions?" Hands went up around the room. I counted 14 in favor. Opposed? 7 hands, including Bob's and mine. Motion carries. Margaret's smile was triumphant. "The new rules take effect Monday morning." I stood up again. "I want to make a statement." "The meeting is adjourned, Mr. Chen. I'm not finished." "Yes, you are." Margaret was already packing her portfolio. "The community has spoken." I walked out of that stuffy room into the humid afternoon air, my neighbors avoiding eye contact as they filed past me toward their cars. Bob caught up with me in the parking lot. "This is insane," he said. "She railroaded that whole meeting." "She's good," I admitted. "I'll give her that." "So what now? You going to follow her stupid rules?" I looked back toward the community center, where Margaret was still inside, probably savoring her victory. Through the window, I could see her talking animatedly with Mrs. Patterson and 2 other board members. "Bob," I said quietly, "what do you know about property law?" "Enough to know you're planning something that's going to make Margaret very unhappy." I clapped him on the shoulder and headed for my car. "See you Monday morning." But what I didn't tell Bob was that Monday morning was going to be very different from what Margaret expected. Sunday night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that stack of property records sitting on my kitchen table and Margaret's smug face as she called that vote. At 3 a.m., I gave up on rest and made coffee, then spread the documents across my dining room table under the overhead light. The more I studied the paperwork, the more certain I became. The State Land Office had been very clear the property was available for immediate purchase if I could provide cash payment and clear the environmental assessment. Dennis had even mentioned that they could expedite the process for an additional fee. By dawn, I'd made my decision. I called Dennis at the state office and left a voicemail requesting the expedited process. Then I called my bank and arranged to liquidate the necessary funds from my retirement account. Margaret wanted to play games with lake access? I was about to change the rules entirely. Monday morning arrived cool and clear, with a kind of crisp air that makes fishing irresistible. I was on the dock at my usual 6:30 a.m., tackle box open, rod assembled, folding chair positioned exactly where it had been for 2 years. The only difference was the certified mail receipt in my pocket and the appointment confirmation from the state land office, scheduled for Wednesday afternoon. At exactly 7 a.m., Margaret appeared on the walkway, this time accompanied by 2 board members I recognized, Jim Morrison from Lot 8 and Sandra Riley from the corner house, with the perfectly manicured roses. "Mr. Chen," Margaret's voice carried across the water like a foghorn. "You're in violation of community access rules." I didn't turn around, just kept working a purple worm along the drop-off where the big bass like to hide. "Morning, Margaret. Beautiful day for fishing." "Did you hear me?" "I said you're in violation." "I heard you." I reeled in my lure and cast again, this time toward the lily pads near the far shore. "Question is, violation of what exactly?" Margaret marched to the end of the dock, her companions trailing behind like nervous backup singers. "The rules approved by community vote on Saturday, which you were present for." "Those rules?" I nodded thoughtfully. "The ones giving the HOA authority to restrict lake access." "Exactly. Here's the thing, Margaret." I finally turned to face her, noting how Jim and Sandra seemed increasingly uncomfortable with their role as enforcers. "Those rules assume the HOA has the legal right to control lake access." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Of course we do. It's a community amenity, clearly stated in the covenants. Access rights and ownership are 2 different things." I reeled in my line and set the rod aside, giving her my full attention. "Which you'd know if you'd bothered to research the actual property records instead of just assuming." "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos I'd taken of the key documents at the county clerk's office. "Crystal Lake isn't owned by the HOA, Margaret. Never has been. Your covenants grant access to property owned by someone else." The color began draining from her face as she stared at the screen. "Someone who hasn't existed for 28 years, I continued, "which means the property reverted to state ownership and has been sitting on the market since 1995. Margaret looked up from my phone, her confident demeanor cracking. That doesn't matter. We have established usage rights." "Actually, you don't. Those died with Lakeside Development Corp." I stood up and packed my tackle box with deliberate slowness. "But don't worry. The current situation won't last much longer." "What do you mean?" I shouldered my tackle box and picked up my folding chair. "I mean, enjoy your lake access rules while they last, Margaret. I have a feeling things are about to change around here." Jim Morrison finally spoke up. "Rob, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that Wednesday afternoon, I have a closing appointment with the state land office." I smiled at Margaret's shocked expression. "Congratulations on motivating me to buy the lake." I walked past the 3 of them, enjoying the absolute silence that followed my announcement. But as I reached my back deck, I heard Margaret's voice carry across the water, sharp with panic. "He's bluffing. There's no way, Jim. Call our lawyer. Now." What Margaret didn't realize was that I'd already spoken to 3 different lawyers, and every one of them had confirmed the same thing. Whoever owned the lake controlled access to the lake. Tuesday brought chaos. By 9 a.m., I'd received 2 phone calls, one from a lawyer claiming to represent the HOA demanding I cease and desist from frivolous legal threats, and another from Margaret herself, offering to discuss the situation like reasonable adults. I declined both conversations and spent the day at the state environmental office, expediting the required water quality and ecological impact assessments. The inspector, a cheerful woman named Dr. Sarah Kim, found Crystal Lake to be in excellent condition, no pollution concerns, thriving fish population, minimal invasive species. She signed off on the purchase within 4 hours. Wednesday morning, Margaret was waiting on my front porch when I came out for the newspaper. She looked like she hadn't slept, her usually perfect hair showing gray roots, her blazer wrinkled. "Rob, please, can we talk?" I unlocked my car and tossed my briefcase into the passenger seat. "What's to talk about, Margaret?" "This is insane. You can't just buy a lake because you're angry about access rules." "Actually, I can. And I'm not angry, I'm retired. I have time and money, and you've given me a very interesting project." I started the engine. "I'll be back this evening. Try not to organize any emergency meetings while I'm gone." The drive to the state capitol took 2 hours through countryside that was just starting to show fall colors. The land office was in a modern building that smelled like new carpet and government efficiency. Dennis turned out to be a tall, thin man with the patient demeanor of someone who spent his days explaining bureaucracy to frustrated citizens. Mr. Chen, right on time. He led me to a conference room with a view of the parking lot. I have to say, this is one of our more unusual sales. Most people buying state land are looking for hunting property or commercial development. Most people don't have HOA presidents trying to ban them from fishing. Dennis laughed. "Fair enough. Let's get you a lake." The paperwork took 90 minutes. Title search, environmental clearance, survey verification, payment authorization. I signed 17 different forms and wrote a check for $47,000, the most expensive fishing license in history. "Congratulations," Dennis said, shaking my hand. "You now own Crystal Lake and all shore property within 50 feet of the high water mark. That includes most of the community dock system, by the way." "Most of it?" The original dock was built by the developer in 1987 and transferred with the lake property. The extensions built by the HOA are technically on your land. He handed me a thick folder of documents. "You might want to talk to a lawyer about that." I drove home in a daze, the folder of ownership papers sitting beside me like treasure. 28 years of unclaimed state property, and all it had taken was Margaret's petty power play to put it in my hands. But as I pulled into my driveway, I could see that the real battle was just beginning. Margaret's car was parked in front of my house, along with 3 others I didn't recognize. Through my living room window, I could see figures moving around. They were inside my house. What I didn't know was that Margaret had convinced the board to authorize an emergency property inspection based on my threats against community safety. I walked through my front door to find Margaret, 2 board members, and a man in a cheap suit standing in my living room, rifling through the papers on my coffee table. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" My voice came out louder than I'd intended, but finding strangers in your house will do that. The man in the suit looked up from my property tax records. "Mr. Chen? I'm Rick Dawson, attorney for the Lakeside Meadows HOA. We're conducting an authorized inspection under Section 12 of the Community Covenants. Section 12 covers exterior property maintenance, not breaking into my house." "Your door was unlocked," Margaret said, not meeting my eyes. "No, it wasn't." I pulled out my phone and showed her the app notification from my smart lock. It logs every entry. Shows you picked the lock at 3:47 p.m. Margaret's face went pale. Jim Morrison looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. "That's a felony," I continued, keeping my voice level despite the rage building in my chest. "Breaking and entering, theft of documents, trespassing." Should I call the sheriff now, or do you want to explain what you're really looking for? Dawson cleared his throat. My clients have legitimate concerns about your claims regarding lake ownership. We're simply verifying. Get out. I stepped aside and pointed toward the door. All of you, now. Mr. Chen, there's no need to be hostile. There's every need. You broke into my house and went through my private papers. In most states, I'd have the right to defend my property with force. I pulled my phone out again. I'm calling 911. Wait, Margaret finally found her voice. Please, we need to know if you're serious about buying the lake. I hit the call button and put the phone on speaker. The 911 operator's voice filled my living room. 911, what's your emergency? I need to report a break-in in progress. 4 people unlawfully entered my home and are currently going through my personal documents. Margaret and her crew practically ran for the door. I heard car doors slamming and engines starting as the operator asked for my address. Never mind, I told the dispatcher. The intruders have left the scene. I'll file a report at the station tomorrow. I hung up and looked around my violated living room. Papers scattered, desk drawers pulled open, even my filing cabinet rifled through. They'd been looking for something specific, probably my bank statements or the property purchase documents. That's when I noticed the folder from the state land office was missing. I searched the house twice, but it was gone. Margaret had stolen the proof of my lake purchase, probably thinking that would somehow invalidate the sale. What she didn't realize was that theft of legal documents is a federal crime when it involves state property transfers. But more importantly, she'd just given me the motivation to make this personal. Thursday morning, I called Dennis at the state land office and requested duplicate copies of all my purchase documents, explaining that the originals had been stolen during a break-in. He was sympathetic and horrified. Apparently, theft of state land sale documents was serious enough to trigger an automatic investigation by the Attorney General's office. We'll overnight replacement documents to you, Dennis assured me. And Mr. Chen? You might want to have those folks arrested. Interfering with state land sales is a federal felony. By noon, I had a different plan forming. Instead of pressing charges immediately, I decided to let Margaret think she'd won. I spent the day shopping for equipment surveyor's flags, boundary markers, and a very expensive sign maker's appointment. Friday morning, I was back on the lake dock at my usual time, fishing as if nothing had changed. Margaret appeared right on schedule, this time with 3 board members and Rick Dawson, the lawyer. They looked confident, almost triumphant. Mr. Chen, Dawson called out as they approached the dock, I think we need to clear up some confusion about property ownership. I didn't look up from my fishing. No confusion on my end, Rick. My clients have reason to believe your claims about purchasing the lake are fraudulent. In fact, we have evidence that no such purchase has occurred. Now I turned around. Margaret was holding a manila folder my stolen documents. Evidence, you say? These documents prove that the lake property remains in state ownership, Margaret said, waving the folder. Your bluff didn't work, Rob. I reeled in my line and set down my rod. Margaret, I'm curious, where did you get those documents? Her smile faltered slightly. That's not relevant. It's very relevant since you stole them from my house during your little breaking and entering adventure. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen, especially since I've been recording this entire conversation. The blood drained from her face as she realized her mistake. Not only had she just confessed to theft on a recorded line, but she was holding stolen property while trying to use it as evidence. But here's the really interesting part, I continued. Those documents you stole? They're not the originals. They're copies I made for my files. I reached into my tackle box and pulled out a fresh manila folder. These are the originals, including the deed showing that I now own Crystal Lake and 50 feet of shoreline property around its entire perimeter. I handed Dawson the folder. He opened it with trembling hands, his face growing paler with each page. As of Wednesday afternoon, I own this lake, I announced to the group. I own the water, the shoreline, and most of your community dock system, which makes all of you trespassers. Margaret snatched the folder from Dawson and stared at the official documents with growing horror. This can't be legal. 28 years of unclaimed state property, fully researched and purchased through proper channels. Your own lawyer can verify the signatures and seals. Dawson was already on his phone, presumably calling someone who could confirm what he was seeing. Margaret looked like she might faint. But don't worry, I continued, enjoying the moment more than I probably should have. I'm not unreasonable. I'm willing to discuss access rights with the community. Access rights? Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. For a reasonable fee, of course. I was thinking $50 per day per person. Cash only. And absolutely no fishing or boating without written permits. The irony was perfect. I was offering them their own rules, applied in reverse. But what none of them realized yet was that I had much bigger plans than daily access fees. Saturday morning brought a caravan of cars to my driveway. Word had spread through the community overnight, and apparently half the neighborhood wanted to see if the rumors were true. I watched from my kitchen window as Margaret organized what looked like a protest march toward the lake. I let them gather at the community dock, then walked down with my folder of ownership documents and a clipboard full of freshly printed access agreements. "Good morning, everyone," I called out as I approached the crowd of about 20 neighbors. Beautiful day for the lake. Margaret was standing on the dock like she was addressing a rally. He's trying to steal our community amenities? This is extortion. Actually, Margaret, it's capitalism. The same system that lets you charge $50 permit fees for folding chairs. I held up the clipboard, but I'm prepared to be reasonable. Daily access passes are $50 per person, as posted. Family rates available. Season passes are $800 per household, paid in advance. The crowd erupted in angry voices. Someone shouted about calling a lawyer. Mrs. Patterson looked like she might cry. Bob pushed through the crowd. "Rob, come on. This is crazy." "Is it, Bob? Let me ask everyone a question." I raised my voice to carry over the protests. "How many of you actually supported Margaret's access restrictions on Saturday?" Several hands went up reluctantly. "You voted to limit lake access to scheduled times, require permits for equipment, and charge fees for dock modifications. The only difference is that now I'm the one setting the rules instead of your HOA president." "It's not the same thing." Margaret's face was bright red. "The HOA rules were for community benefit. Your rules were to keep me from fishing in the morning. My rules are to keep you from trespassing on my property." I smiled. "But unlike you, I'm open to negotiation." I pulled out a second set of papers. "I'm prepared to offer the HOA community access lease. Unlimited lake access for all residents, all activities, no restrictions. Annual fee of $24,000 paid to me as the property owner." The crowd went silent as they calculated the numbers. 24,000 divided by 43 households was about $550 per year, less than most of them spent on cable TV. "That's reasonable," Bob said quietly. "Very reasonable," I agreed. "And it comes with a guarantee no access restrictions, no permit fees, no scheduled time slots. Everyone gets to use the lake exactly the way we all did before Margaret decided to play power games." Margaret was sputtering with rage. "This is blackmail, extortion. I'll have you arrested." "For what? Owning property and offering lease terms?" I shrugged. "Margaret, You created this situation when you tried to ban me from the lake. I'm just working within the system you established." Rick Dawson had been quiet during the entire exchange, presumably talking to someone on his phone. Now he stepped forward. "Mr. Chen, my clients would like to discuss terms." "Smart choice. My office hours are 9 to 5, Monday through Friday." I handed him a business card I'd had printed that morning. "Call for an appointment." I turned to walk away, then paused. "Oh, and Margaret? The next time you want to search my house, try getting a warrant first. Breaking and entering is still a felony, even for HOA presidents." But as I walked back toward my house, I could hear Margaret on her phone again, and her tone suggested she wasn't ready to surrender. Monday brought lawyers, 3 of them, in fact, plus a county commissioner and someone claiming to represent the state environmental office. They set up in the community center like a task force, and by noon, they were knocking on my door with papers. "Mr. Chen?" The lead lawyer was a severe-looking woman in her 40s. "I'm Patricia Wells, representing the Lakeside Meadows Community Association. We have some concerns about your recent property acquisition."